The secret neighbor. I live in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. The house is old, built in the 50s, with thin walls and wooden floors that creak even from the slightest step. Here is not the most comfortable area, but the price of rent suited me, so I decided to close my eyes to minor inconveniences. For the first few months, everything was quiet. I worked from home, so I used to hear the sounds of the neighbors, music, muffled voices, children's laughter. But one day something strange happened. It was late in the evening, around midnight. I was already about to go to bed when I heard a quiet knock. It was coming from behind the wall in the kitchen, right behind the fridge. At first I thought it was just the sounds of an old house, maybe pipes or mice. But the knock continued. It was measured, as if someone were tapping their finger on the wall. I tried to ignore it, but the next evening the knock was repeated. This time it was louder. I got a strange feeling, as if someone was trying to get my attention. After a few days, the knocking became daily. I could no longer ignore it. I decided that it was probably the neighbors behind the wall. But it was strange. There was a common corridor behind the wall, not someone's apartment. That night I couldn't stand it. I went to the wall and knocked back. There was silence. I already began to think that everything was over. But after a couple of seconds the knock rang again, like an answer. I felt goosebumps running down my back. The next day, I decided to check the wall. I looked at it, but I didn't notice anything unusual. So I moved the refrigerator to look behind it, and there, to my surprise, I found a small crack, wide enough to look inside. Behind the crack was emptiness. It seemed like the space between the walls. I shined a flashlight there and saw something strange. Inside were old newspapers, some rags, and a little children's toy. It was something creepy, but I was trying to stay rational. It's probably just old stuff left over from the time the house was built. But why was there a toy? That night, the knocking got louder. Now it sounded closer, as if someone was right behind the wall. I knocked back again, but this time no one answered. Instead, I heard something like a whisper. I could barely make out the words, but it was definitely someone's voice. My heart pounded like a rabbit. I decided I needed to talk to the neighbor from above or below to see if they heard something like that. The downstairs neighbor said he sometimes hears strange noises, but thinks it's just rats. The upstairs neighbor generally stated that he didn't notice anything unusual. The next night, I armed myself with a camera. I wanted to record knocking or any other oddities to prove that I was not going crazy. I left the camera on in the kitchen, and I went to bed myself. In the morning, I watched the recording. Nothing unusual at first, just the usual night sounds at home. But at about 3 a.m., the camera recorded movement. The recording shows the refrigerator moving slowly, as if someone was pushing it from inside the wall. I froze. I watched the record to the end and heard a quiet, barely distinguishable voice on it. Someone whispered, "You will find me." I didn't know what to do. Call the police? But what do I tell them? That the wall is talking to me? I will definitely be mistaken for crazy. That day, I decided to examine the wall again. I took a hammer and began to carefully punch it. Behind the layer of plaster, a cavity appeared, a small space that looked like a cache. There lay an old battered diary. I opened it and started reading it. It was the diary of some kid who lived here years ago. He wrote about being hidden from bad people. The last entries were torn, as if someone had written them in a hurry. The last entry read, "They're coming for me. I hope someone finds this place." After that, I didn't hear the knocking anymore. But every time I walk past the kitchen, I feel like I'm being watched. After finding the diary, I could not calm down for a long time. Reading these entries left an unpleasant aftertaste, as if I had touched something forbidden. But most of all, I was disturbed by the last entry. "They are coming for me." Who are they? And what happened to the child? The next day, I decided to delve into the history of the house. I went to the local archive. This old building smelled of dust and mold, but it kept all the city records for the past few decades. The librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses, looked at me with suspicion, but still helped find materials about the house. Studying the old drawings, I noticed a strange detail. Behind the wall where I found the cache, there was once really a small room. It was, as I understood it, a pantry or utility room. However, in the 70s it was walled up. The reason was not specified in the documents. Then it was even more interesting. In the newspapers of those years, I found a note that a girl named Lily had disappeared from this house. She was 8 years old. She was searched for several months, but without success. Her parents soon left the city, and the case remained unsolved. I already knew the diary belonged to this girl, but what happened to her? On my way back home, I tried to tie it all together. Maybe Lily was hidden in that very room, and then something went wrong. But who hid her? And who were those bad people? Things got worse tonight. I heard a knock again. This time it was not from behind the wall, but from somewhere below, as if someone was hitting the floor. I went downstairs to check if the neighbor was making noise, but his apartment was dark, and no one opened. Back to my place, I tried to sleep, but I was woken up by a loud rumble. I jumped out of bed and ran to the kitchen. The refrigerator moved again. On the floor in front of it lay the same children's toy I saw in the cache. It was a doll, scuffed and faded from time to time. But the creepiest thing is her eyes seemed to look right at me. I grabbed the doll and threw it in the garbage disposal. In the morning, I decided it was time to move out. This apartment was clearly not for me. However, before I left, I wanted to close the issue with the cache. If there is anything else there, it needs to be found. Taking tools, I widened the hole in the wall to look deeper. Behind the plaster, I found a small niche. On the floor lay some old things, a couple of books, a box of photos, and a metal box. I opened it and froze, and there were little bones inside, and they were the remains. I figured out what happened. Lily wasn't just hidden, she was walled up. That night I couldn't sleep. I wanted to wait until morning to tell the police everything, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up again by a knock. This time it came from everywhere, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and then I heard her voice. The same whisper, but now it was louder. Why didn't you help? I tried to explain what I didn't know, but the voice got louder and angrier. Why didn't you help me? Suddenly, the light in the apartment began to flash. I felt the temperature around me drop sharply. The voice changed to crying, loud and tearful, filling the whole room. I ran out of the apartment without even locking the door. The next day, I returned with the police. They managed to open the wall and take the remains. Lily's case was reopened, but I no longer followed its development. I moved to another city, away from that house. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear her voice. Why didn't you help? It took a few months. Life began to get back on track, but the memory of that apartment and Lily's voice still haunted me. I often woke up at night in a cold sweat, listening to the silence, as if afraid to hear her whisper. One morning I received a letter. It was without a stamp, as if someone had put it in my mailbox. There was no name or address on the envelope, only my name. I opened the envelope. Inside was an old, slightly yellowed photograph. It shows a girl of 7 or 8 years old with long dark hair and a doll on her arms. The same doll. On the back of the photo was the inscription. Asterisk, asterisk, you can still help. Come. Asterisk, asterisk. My heart froze. I already decided to leave everything behind, but this letter seemed to pull me back into a nightmare. Despite the fear, I knew I had to come back. There was something unsaid, something that Lily or whoever left this letter wanted from me. In the evening, I took the train and went back to that city. By night, I was standing in front of that house. It looked even more depressing than before. The light in the windows of my former apartment was burning. Although I knew for sure that no one lived there, I went up the stairs. The door was ajar, as if someone was waiting for me. Lily, I quipped as I went inside. There was no answer. The apartment was cold. The air was thick, like before a thunderstorm. On the floor in the center of the room lay the same doll. I was sure that I threw it away, but now it is here again. I'm here. A quiet whisper rang out behind my back. I turned around, but I didn't see anyone. Only a slight smell of lilac filled the room. What do you want, Lily? I asked, trying to cope with the trembling in my voice. Suddenly, I felt something warm and soft touch my hand. When I looked down, I saw a small child's palm clutching mine. Help me. Find her, Lily whispered. Find who? My mom. She's waiting for me. At that moment, I realized that the nightmare was not over. Lily needed my help, and in order to restore peace, I had to uncover the secret that connected her to this house.